Okay, while they're getting settled, our next speaker to come to the Common Ground stage is Nadine McBride. Woo! Shout out to Nadine. So I came to know Nadine and her husband Jordy, who along with their children owned and operated Menaki Yurt Adventures and of course the famous Rock Kids mountain bike camp in Menaki. This morning, Nadine will share memorable stories from a different time in her life. In 1977, her parents, aunt, and uncle bought the Hudson's Bay store in Menaki and created the Bayridge General Store. Let's give Nadine a warm welcome to the Common Ground stage. I'm looking forward to her story.
The Hudson Bay Company is one of the iconic Canadian brands. Its frontier posts were the last remnants of the sprawling fur trading empire and have serviced hard-to-reach communities for hundreds of years, selling anything from food and clothing to blankets and hardware. It was a gathering spot to cash checks and catch up with local news. Due to leaner times, the Hudson Bay Company began to sell off many of its outlets. My Uncle Joe Albert, he worked as a senior executive for the Hudson Bay Company. He was at a meeting where one of the Hudson Bay stores in Menaki was deemed unprofitable. And he spoke with his wife, Nell Albert, and Nell's sisters, Florence, Flo McLean, and Flo's husband, Donald, Don McLean, who were my parents, about purchasing the store as a partnership. On December 8th, 1977, the Hudson Bay store in Menaki became the Bayridge. A distinctive wall mural came with the purchasing showing the river system that the canoe brigades used to access the Hudson Bay Company's trading posts. Right before the Menaki post was Fort Alexander, which was established by the Hudson Bay Company in and around 1793. It's interesting to note that Flo and her sister Nell's parents were from Fort Alexander, located along the Winnipeg River, and were part of the Saugeen First Nation, allowing the sisters, their 7 siblings, and their children to obtain their Indigenous status. The name Saugeen means mouth of the river, and Menaki is Ojibwe for beautiful country. The year I turned 13, my parents packed us up and headed us from the city of Winnipeg to the hamlet of Menaki. My friends all rode their bikes behind our car as we drove down our back lane towards a new chapter of our life. When we arrived, I felt like I had gone back in time, sort of like a little house on the prairies. I was used to having all this culture and the busyness that the city offers, and now it seemed like there was nothing. We lived on top of the old Hudson Bay store, which was pretty derelict. There was a grate in the floor that could be removed, and my older brother and I would often bring a little fishing line down and take some pop that was stored in the warehouse below. It wasn't long before the locals began to show up to meet the new store owners. The town had a unique vibe about it, just like when you watch the Beachcombers or Corner Gas. There were fishing camp owners, First Nation families, CN workers, OPP families, and many that loved the area and looked to make it home. Once summer came, the cottagers arrived, and that population suddenly really felt more vibrant. The 4 partners took on distinctive roles. Don became the butcher and prepared all the special cuts of meats. There was a big walk-in cooler attached to the preparation area, which had the most beautiful butcher block that he would meticulously clean and salt down each night. He was an amazing cook, and he would use meats that were due to be used, marinating top-cut steaks and simmering for hours pulled pork. Here is Dad in his white butcher jacket, handing a longtime local Jim Hayward a $5 win. Apparently this was before there was no smoking signs in the store. Flo was always the consistent and main face. Oh, at the cash register, greeting everyone by name with a smile. I think I'd lose it on that. Don and Joe would often secretly consult with Flo before engaging in a conversation with customers, as Flo remembered everyone and what was going on in their lives. Mom loved to be social, and she welcomed friends and family and community to come by the house for a bite to eat. And if you said no, she would say, "You don't like my cooking?" And then you would have to say yes, and you would have to stay and eat. On Boxing Day, they often had an open house, and for anyone who was allowed to drop in, Mom made pierogies and cabbage rolls, and Dad a feast of meats among other treats. Uncle Joe was largely the office administrator, and Aunt Nell was quiet and kept busy with stocking shelves, cleaning, and some purchasing. They lived right next door to my parents, and I would go back and forth, visiting as I pleased. The Bayridge was a central hub where you could get all your groceries, meat, baking, clothing, homeware, liquor, postal supplies, and even coffee and lunch there. It serviced all the locals, cottagers, tourists, and the neighboring community of White Dog, now known as Wabisamong. You could make bets on when the ice was going to be out on Gun Lake Bay, or go by Bruce the Talking Spruce, which is a Christmas tree that was hooked up to a speaker where from the back Joe could address anybody who happened to be walking by it. They ran a professionally clean and well-stocked store. The store provided many locals, cottager kids, friends, and family employment. I had cousins and even a best friend from Winnipeg that worked and lived with us for the summer. My father even trained my husband to become a butcher, but at the time he was a vegetarian butcher. A big addition to the store was a bake shop, which created more employment. Smells of the fresh daily baking drifted down the aisles in the morning. To this day, word of the Bayridge's cheese buns still come up in conversations. The Alberts and the McLeans cared. They truly cared about their business, the people, and the community. It was a time when credit cards were not the method of payment, but credit was offered when needed. Accounts could be opened with money down and deducted from with each purchase. Some accounts were taken into the red. However, if a family needed food, but the money was not there, the owners trusted that their customers, their own neighbors, would pay back what was owed when they were able. It was a community service, and individual circumstances mattered. The store had a good period where it prospered, especially during the Moonachie Lodge, the Jewel of the North era, of reopening in 1983 with Radisson Resorts, and then the Four Seasons beginning in 1987. They provided all the fresh baking and much of the pastries for the lodge, as well as other necessities the lodge, its staff, and the visitors required. The town really came to life with this injection of tourism and all the young staff that came along with it. As a teenager growing up during that time, it felt like the movie Dirty Dancing. With the fun and the gathering of teens and 20-year-olds, there was music, dancing, and even toga parties. It was a time of like no other. Moonachie Lodge eventually burnt down on October 12, 2003, and the town never really seemed to be the same since. But there were many fun times that little hamlet of Moonachie had with its tiny population. There were Easter parades, lunch with Santa, winter festivals, volleyball games, and dances at the hall, as well as talent nights with skits, music, songs, and dance. There was a huge New Year's party in the closed-down Menaki Lodge where it was a glamorous occasion with an exotic menu and dancing. I was helping to check coats, and it felt like it was a red carpet event in town. And this photo is just of a memorable skit of the whistling and dancing bellies, and it features my Uncle Joe, my dad Don, and Barry Gibson, which was, I remember, a huge hit that night at Talent Night. And then there's also a photo of my parents at the Winter Carnival, where we used to always have a Winter Carnival with my dog Chimo, where you'd hit a golf ball into one of the holes to get points for a prize. I felt like there was much respect to for the store and its owners and what they provided for the community. All holiday events, big and small, were celebrated in the store with decorations and enthusiasm. I remember gate night, the day before Halloween, where young people play pranks or do some mischief in the neighborhood, and the store got egged. The following gate night, Don and Joe were ready to find out who the culprits were, and they set up a station with their cameras in case it was to happen again. Caught red-handed with his arms back, ready to throw an egg, was a local youth with a red-eye flash from the camera. He did come back the next day and he cleaned the window, and no one ever threw an egg on gate night at the Bayridge again. The McLean house, my house, was always a must-go-to for the kids in the neighborhood at Halloween. Mom put together big bags of treats as well as comic books for each child. She handed them all out while dressed up in costume. And this is my parents, Flo and Dawn, and they were asked to be godparents to 3 of the local children at a ceremony held in Menaki. This is Sophie, Marty, and Macy. The first winter that we moved to Menaki was the last winter that the Menaki downhill ski area was open. New to downhill skiing, I made a straight line from the top of the hill down to the chalet before I was eventually taught how to turn. My parents were horrified. My parents also signed me up for ringette, as I used to play when I lived in the city. My first year at school in Kenora, I was 13, and I was sent with all my equipment and told to find my way to the arena and that they would pick me up when they were finished work. I didn't know where the arena was. I asked someone in school if they knew of anyone that played ringette. They said Janet Finley does, and they brought me to her locker. When she arrived, I introduced myself and asked her about where the arena was. I was in luck because her bus went right by it on her way home, and she invited me on the bus to show me. When the bus stopped near the recreation center, I got up to leave and said to Janet, "We'll see you at practice." And she informed me that practice didn't start for hours, and invited me to her place and asked her parents if I could stay for dinner. At dinner time, the Finley clan, I believe 8 of the 9, were seated at the table. Bruce Finley, Janet's father, asked Janet who her friend was, and Janet looked at me and said, "I don't know, what's your name again?" My new teenage life now consisted of reading all the magazines and comics that came into the store weekly, water skiing, boating, and eventually island parties. When I was 18, I went on to work at Menaki Lodge as a water skiing instructor and tour guide. I knew the lake, but only the close-by routes I traveled. My boss at Menaki Lodge sent me to guide a group of senators and their wives toward the Dalles. I told him I wasn't sure about that route, but he said I was to do it anyways. When I turned the boat around after reaching our destination, I was unsure of the way back, so I slowed it right down, and I thought I'd just wait for another boat to come along, and I'd just follow it. The senators asked me if something was wrong, but I just told them I was enjoying the scenery. When suddenly another boat whizzed by, I put the throttle down, leaving the ladies in their high heels stumbling to the back of the boat. And happily, we made it back to Menaki Lodge. The freedom of being on the lake was unlike my hanging out at 7-Eleven Slurpee drinking days in the city. And I just remember even on hot, sleepless nights that I would run down from home to the town dock and jump in the lake and run back up and go to bed. I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs and was trained in most departments of the store to help out when needed. One of my most notable customers when I was young and just moved there was Alex Saviard. It was hard at times to understand Alex. Sometimes I just couldn't make out what he was saying, and he would just act it out for me. One conversation, Alex was saying to me that ice, no good. But I didn't understand him, and I asked him to say it again. And instead, he just put his arms out to the side and did some tiptoeing, and then started flailing his arms, screaming, "Ah, ah!" He had fallen through the ice early and thought he should let me know that the ice was now not safe. I opened up my first summer business when I was in high school in the building beside the Bayridge, which was the original Hudson Bay store. It was a pinball arcade, and I sold cut French fries, like the chip truck does, ice cream, and other treats. It had a jukebox, and my friends and I would play Let the Good Times Roll by the Cars over and over. I had a few lake friends come and work for me, and I managed to make enough money that summer to take a trip to Europe. One tragedy that occurred in town, I remember, is when a young man lost his life due to a car collision. Joe and Don both attended the scene and were horrified at how long it took to get to the emergency services to this distant hamlet. They arranged for and began a process to successfully create a local first response team. 6 people in all joined Joe and Don in training to become Monaca's first response team. I was eventually on the team and was there until it was finally dissolved. One day, my dad was working at the liquor store when a young and pregnant woman came to purchase liquor. Don spoke to her about her baby and cautioned her against drinking. She purchased the bottle anyway and left. He was really concerned and could not stop thinking about it. And the next time she came in to buy another bottle, Don pulled out a National Geographic magazine and opened it to a story on fetal alcohol syndrome. The woman stared down at the open page, then turned and left without making a purchase. She didn't come back to the liquor store until a much later date, but this time it was to thank Don. She had not taken a drink during the remainder of her pregnancy and had a beautiful and healthy baby. Don was awarded an Ontario Bicentennial Medal. It honors the spirit of pioneer beginnings and the tradition of helping one another, which characterized our first years together and carries on to this day. It was most appropriate to honor Ontario's volunteers during the bicentennial year. 1,984 special bicentennial medals were struck, identical in form to the one presented to Her Majesty the Queen, and awarded to those who have given of themselves tirelessly, time and time again, to build a better society and enrich the lives of others. The medal was presented on behalf of the people of our province with heartfelt pride to reflect their sincere appreciation. Flo was recognized for the exceptional effort which contributed to Canada's tradition of friendship and goodwill towards international visitors. The Tourism Ambassador Certificate was received on behalf of the Government of Canada. Don and Flo, after so many years of servicing their community, eventually sold the Bayridge to Richard and Barb Anton. They were Monaca cottagers and friends of the McLeans. My parents eventually sold their home a couple of years later and moved to an apartment in downtown Winnipeg in 2006. Nell passed away in 2010. Don on April 8, 2011, and Flo on February 20th, 2021. Presently, 2023, Joe is living in a senior's residence in Calgary, Alberta, close to one of his daughters. I still keep in touch with him, and he is as sharp as ever. I gave my parents a hard time in the beginning for moving to Monaca because it really had its challenges. Like not being able to call my friends because it was long distance to Kenora and I was a teenage girl, was one of them. But one day I remember my father and I were driving home from school, and I thanked my father for moving to Monaco. And he would tell people that story over and over, and he would always add, I almost drove off the road when she said that. So the Bayridge is no longer a general store in Monaco. The building right now services as a storage space. That's